The reason stress is bad for health is because it costs energy. And then that ends up stealing energy away from the processes that normally keep us healthy and young.
Welcome back to the Mind-Gut Conversation. Today, my guest is Martin Picard, professor of behavioral medicine and endowed chair in the science of energy and health at Columbia University, and key opinion leader in the field of mitochondrial biology. Martin's goal is to accelerate the development of a new scientific field, healing science. To achieve this goal, Martin has unified mitochondrial biology, bioenergetics, and aging science, together with integrative medicine, psychosocial sciences, and contemplative practices, into a rigorous interdisciplinary research program unparalleled in the field. Today's episode discusses the following topics: how the mitochondria influence aging, chronic stress and exercise physiology far beyond their traditional role in energy production, exploring the evolutionary origins of mitochondria and their potential interactions with our gut microbes, understanding Dr. Picard's concept of intrinsic health as a scientific framework that aligns with holistic traditions, as well as integrative and functional medicine. Finally, what mitochondria-targeted therapies might mean for preventing and treating today's epidemic of chronic non-communicable diseases. Welcome to the show, Martin. Martin, it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you and have you share some of your amazing insights and research findings with our audience. Let me start with so I have a series of questions from the most general and simple to some pretty, I would say, paradigm-changing views of the field. So let's start with the most basic questions for the listeners who are not versed in that. What are the mitochondria and where do they come from?
The mitochondria are small living organisms that populate every one of our cells. So every one of the cells in your body, neurons, cardiac cells, gut cells, muscle cells, they're full of mitochondria. And so they look sometimes like elongated filaments, like spaghettis, and sometimes they look like little beans. And that's because the long ones can undergo fission, so they can fragment into smaller ones, and then the smaller ones can come together, fuse, and become long. So there's this constant dynamics of it's called mitochondrial dynamics, fusion and fission, and then new mitochondria are born out of this process, just like bacteria. They grow bigger, longer, and they divide. So that's how new mitochondria come to life, and then old mitochondria get recycled. So old mitochondria die out, and then new ones are born. So they have a life cycle. So we think of them as little social creatures that live inside our cells. And depending of your worldview, if you're gene-centric or if you're mitocentric, you can think that, what happened through evolution is that mitochondria kind of took over and then, created these creatures that we are, mammals and human beings. And where they come from is from this evolutionary process called endosymbiosis. Endosymbiosis means kind of inside, and then symbiosis means working together. So the term means working together from the inside. And about 1.5 billion years ago, there was this kind of evolutionary merger that happened where you have a bigger cell that couldn't use oxygen for energy transformation. It was anaerobic. And then there was a smaller cell, bacterium, an alpha proteobacterium, that was able to use oxygen for transforming energy. It was aerobic. And this alpha proteobacterium, aerobic, somehow found itself inside the big one. And then the dominant story is the big one ate it, for food. The another story is a small one actually kind of entered and colonized a big one. So I don't think we know for sure. But the product, what we know for sure is that this symbiosis actually transformed both parties. So the big cell became more social, became more able to communicate, and the small bacterium became mitochondria. And it's clear that this combination was the key trigger for complex multicellular life. And so as a result, life was very simple, like only single cells, on the ocean floor for millions of years. And then when the endosymbiosis happened, boom, there was an explosion in the complexity of life. So mitochondria, we think, was an evolutionary precursor to complex life forms that eventually allowed a bunch of cells to work together, and then some cells that differentiate become better at transforming energy. Other cells become better at sensing stuff. Other cells become better at moving and crawling. And then worms emerge, and then flies, and then birds, and then fish, and then eventually mammals, and then thinking, feeling, conscious creatures like us coming from this mitochondrial endosymbiosis.
That's an amazing story. I thought we had an exciting story in the microbiome field where these early microbes colonized the gut of these creatures, of the first animals, and then developed also the symbiosis with the gut and transferred genes. I mean, they didn't invade actually the cells; they transferred genes to the gut, and then ultimately, which made it to the brain. And so,
Well, very similar story, right? It's gonna coming inside. In this case, it's different scales, maybe inside this big cell, right? Or in this case, it's inside the digestive tract, but the product is the same. There was also an exchange of genes between mitochondria, the aerobic bacterium, and the big cell. About 1,000 genes were transferred from mitochondria to the nucleus, at least. And then they became kind of genetically intertwined and then dependent on one another. So now you cannot have mitochondria that live outside the cell, and you cannot have a normal healthy cell that lives without mitochondria. So you need to they become genetically and functionally and metabolically interdependent. Maybe very much like the gut microbiome. Same pattern, but at different scale.
yeah, that is an absolutely fascinating story.
Very cool.
Not necessarily with clinical implications right now, but I think from a scientific standpoint, it's absolutely fascinating, and where we came from, and that we got some of our most boasted neurotransmitters in the brain, and the mechanisms to use oxygen from bacteria. It's
Yeah.
Is it just sort of staying with this topic? Is it today? I mean, the microbes in the gut seem to be interacting with a lot of systems in our body with this interface that they have with the immune system. Is anything known about interactions between the gut microbiome and the mitochondria? Is that something?
Yeah, the mitochondria used to be bacteria, and the microbiome, actual bacteria, they're cousins of one another. So it would make sense from that perspective that they might, you know, have the ability to talk to each other, or at least, feel each other's presence and metabolism and other kind of activities. There's one very clear pathway that's, well known, by which the microbiome can influence the mitochondria, and that's in the production of short chain fatty acids. So there's butyrate is a short chain fatty acid that's produced, I think, from the metabolism of fibers by the microbiome, and the short chain fatty acids are food for mitochondria, and very similar to ketone bodies, right? That are made by the liver, and if you look in the liver, you ask, where do ketone bodies come from in the liver? It comes from the hepatocyte mitochondria. So the mitochondria in the hepatocytes is where the beta hydroxybutyrate, for example, the BHB, is made. So the mitochondria in the liver made BHB, put this out in the blood as food source, and then the mitochondria in the brain, for example, can directly feed onto those short chain fatty acids. So there's this system endogenously where the liver makes BHB, and then they can feed mitochondria across the body. And the microbiome can also, do this. So there's probably, through butyrate at least, probably many other things that I don't know about. The microbiome can feed the mitochondria. And there's some evidence that if you change a mitochondria, that can also change a microbiome, the composition and the diversity. But there's that's a very new field of research.
Yeah, it's fascinating about the butyrate, because butyrate is sort of one of the most studied and most discussed molecules, with its sort of the systemic anti-inflammatory effects also on.
Right. Yes.
So it's sort of like this pharmacy that that the body has in close collaboration with the microbes. And so I was aware of that, the fact that it also, plays a role in with the microbes, with mitochondria. I mean, that's,
Yeah, it's a collective, and fundamentally, the organism is an energetic system, right? What the basis of life is sustaining energy flow through the system. So there are multiple different intertwined metabolic pathways and axes that allow the exchange of energy and the transformation of energy. So I think it makes a lot of sense that the two bacterial cousins would kind of have a very strong bond, metabolic or energetic bond between them.
yeah. Yeah, talking about this energy concept. I mean, this like when I heard you talking at a meeting in San Francisco last year, or was it earlier this year? Um, I was sort of fascinated the way you presented this. It was almost like um, I mean, there's other healing traditions like traditional Chinese medicine where energy and qi plays such a central role. I mean, obviously that only shares the name, but I mean, I just wonder if you could just highlight some of the key points that you presented in your talk. This whole aspect of energy that we don't. Um, I mean, patients complain about lack of energy and
Yeah.
um, being tired, and there's all kinds of names for it, brain fog. Um, but it really goes down to these molecular mechanisms that that you've been talking about.
We think we we think yes. Like what is energy? If you ask people, and I've been doing this now. I'm writing a book on. It's called Energy, and this one word means so many different things. Even physicists don't agree what energy is. There's, energy is kind of the most mysterious concept because it's not a thing, right? Like if you talk about a mitochondrion is a thing you can look at under the microscope, a cell, a gene, even ATP, right? Like it's a molecule, but energy is not a thing. Energy is the potential for change and materializes, right? In different ways. It materializes into, heat, so thermal energy, electromagnetic waves, sounds, right? There's a form of energy, pressure waves, uh, um, nuclear energy. There's all sorts of radiation. There's all sorts of different forms of energy. Energy can never be created nor destroyed. So it's conserved, thermodynamics, but it's transformed in from these different forms. And that is what life does. Life is about transforming energy and then harnessing that transformation to sustain a biological system. Um, so if you think about life from very basic and from first principles, it becomes clear that the defining characteristics, the key difference between a living, thinking body, someone who's alive and breathing and can interact with other human beings, and a cadaver, right? A dead body. The main difference is not in how many cells there are or how many genes there are or even the metabolites for the most parts are the same. And so the structure is all the same. The difference is the flow of energy, right? So the flow of energy is what brings this whole thing, this hardware, into life, and that's what brings the mind to life, or consciousness. So it's the flow of energy through the system that is the basis for what we experience, for what we fundamentally are. And I think there, if you ask, what are we? What is life? What is a human being? Uh, Either you say the human being is a molecular machine, right? And it has this many cells, this many genes, and all of this, and then it's kept alive by this flow of energy, which we don't really understand. Or an alternative view is you say a human being is the flow of energy, right? And it seems like it happens to take place in this physical structure. And so you really are the flow of energy, but the flow of energy needs a physical structure. It needs kind of a home that which we perceive as a human body. So I think that the concept of energy that is used in traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and all sorts of ancient traditions is conceptually very similar to how we understand mitochondrial biology to work, and how modern biomedicine understands the the field of bioenergetics. But practically, there's, I think, a difference here that we cannot really measure energy in its different forms, or we can't observe it as directly as we can observe molecules. So there's kind of a technical challenge to testing some of the concepts and hypotheses that emerge from those ancient traditions, or kind of this subtle energy field that might exist, that might be the basis for acupuncture and meridians and energy healing and all sorts of things like this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to digress, but you mentioned something about the mind and consciousness. So, I mean, it's a side issue in this conversation, but I'm kind of interested in that aspect as well. And so there's always these discussions about planetary consciousness. I attended a meeting at the Sadhguru's Center for Planetary Consciousness at the Beth Israel, which was really interesting. So there's this debate: is consciousness dependent on the brain, or is it something that exists on the planet as well? It's some other, which again, Eastern traditions would sort of favor this larger. And I think it's something to do with what you said about energy. So as long as there's energy, it could be that there could also be consciousness.
Mm-hmm. I think if you kind of go to the most fundamental nature of energy, and this is where like quantum physics concepts become relevant, and the nature of it, right? And it's non, it's delocalized, and it's there's a potential there to manifest into something, right? When it's observed, and so those kind of concepts, I think, resonate a lot with the metaphysical concepts of consciousness. So I mean, neuroscience has been in the business of trying to explain consciousness for decades now, and the approach it chose, which was very much kind of in the boom of molecular biology and materialism and physicalism, there's a philosophical assumption that I think we've all grown up with as scientists, and even if you're not a scientist, you grew up in this culture that is influenced by the current movement of science. So I think the current movement of science, which is physicalism, materialism, everything is like small little pieces, and then everything that we experience must emerge from the smaller bits, right? This is one way of thinking, and that's like, we need to appreciate this. This is one philosophical approach, which for us, I think, is almost like a fish and water. Like the relationship of a fish to water, the fish has no way of knowing it lives in water, because from the very first moment that it was alive, it was in water, and it's never seen anything else. So I think us as scientists, we grew up like a fish in water in this world where we bathe in physicalism and materialism, and it's really hard to imagine a different way of thinking about the fundamental questions like consciousness. But if you if you read enough and you listen to enough people, philosophers, physicists, consciousness researchers who've been thinking about this and questioning the physicalist and materialist perspective, I think that the arguments are much stronger that consciousness is more fundamental than matter. And if consciousness is more fundamental, meaning that it doesn't need to emerge from matter, right? Matter could actually emerge from consciousness. I think the arguments from that perspective are actually stronger. And if that's true, then maybe there's some deep truth about the fact that there's this underlying current of consciousness, and maybe similar to like there's dark energy. There's like energy in every little bit of space that we can't perceive, we can't, right? But the physics is very clear. There's a lot of energy that we don't have access to. So if that's the case, maybe there's a parallel there between this like unified field of consciousness and this underlying energetic reality that it seems all of matter emerges from.
This would also make the the mitochondrial function and role even bigger. Like you was
In what way? How you think about this?
No, I mean, like if energy is the primal force on the planet or in the universe, then the mitochondria, who are specialized in generating energy and maintain this energy flow through the body, have a crucial role. And so, I mean, they're almost like the representatives of that larger rule that dominates the universe. Really, I mean, we're sort of getting a pretty esoteric
We're
area.
getting philosophical because I don't think we'll ever be able to prove this. So, right, this is the realm of philosophy versus the realm of science. But if we never think and talk about these things, then we get stuck in dogmas and we get stuck in overly simplistic and probably inaccurate ways of thinking about the world. So I think it's useful to think philosophically about this. And I just want to mention something regarding what you said. Mitochondria don't generate energy, right? Energy is never generated or produced, but they transform energy. Uh, and the most of what we know about mitochondrial energy transformation is they transform chemical energy in the form of food, right? If you eat lipids, right, oils, proteins or carbohydrates, mitochondria take the energy that's stored, right? Actually, light energy from the sun that was stored in food, and then mitochondria take this, dematerialize. They take material chemical energy, dematerialize this into an electrical gradient, right? An immaterial form of energy. And then once mitochondria become charged like little batteries, now they can take that very flexible form of energy to make ATP, right? But then to do, dozens of other things. So from that perspective, mitochondria act a bit as a portal, right? A portal between the material world of stuff and things like food and cells and genes, and maybe kind of this immaterial dimension of energy. And maybe that stretches all the way to, consciousness. So I have some ideas and hypotheses about this, but I don't know that we're in a position to test any of those.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, I talked to a lot of people on this podcast, and amongst my scientific colleagues throughout my career, it's rare that you have somebody who is at the cutting edge of science, but at the same time, has this philosophical insight and interest. I mean, it's really a unique combination, I would say.
Well, it feels like one of the biggest gap in our knowledge and biomedicine, and our understanding of we care about understanding what health is and how we can improve health and heal from diseases. And it seems like the biggest gap is this interaction between the lived human experience, right? Like the thing you have access to that lets you know that you're alive, right? This is like small c consciousness or like individual consciousness awareness. There's no denying that this is real because that's what allows us now to to talk to one another. um, this is the spectrum of human experience is so fundamental, and it is the basis for all of human behaviors, right? If we want to change how people eat, if we want to help people exercise more, if we want to help people come out of addiction, or whatever it is, make good life choices and so on, be good human beings, like the human experience is the foundation for you wake up in the morning and either you feel like, wow, I have so much energy, I have so much capacity, right? And then you feel like you can do great things. You can be the father you want to be, you can be the a good friend, you can be a good spouse, um and you can do great things. And there's this kind of unbounded capacity, that's like the one extreme of the human experience. The other extreme of the human experience is you wake up one morning and you feel like you don't even want to be here, and you'd rather die. And this is reality for a lot of people, and we all live on this continuum and we all move along this continuum. This is a human experience. We have no scientific understanding of the basis for where you lie on this continuum. And we've tried to biologize, to go into the biology, the molecular nature of like molecular psychiatry as a field, biological psychiatry. And psychiatry kind of taps into part of this spectrum of human experience with, the tools that it has. Um, so we've failed, I think, as a scientific community, we've failed to bridge the human experience, which is fundamentally what's most uh, close to us, and the biology and the molecular dimension of life. Those things relate to one another in some way. And I think most of biomedicine has decided that the truest piece that we need to, understand is the molecular dimension of things, and then this other piece, the human experience, is too fuzzy, is too, inaccessible or it doesn't make sense from materialism and physicalism. So I feel deeply, moved and inspired to try to bridge that divide between the human experience. That's not esoteric. This is like, how do you feel right now? Are you, able to be, at your best? Are you able to reach your optimal state of health and well-being? This is the real deal. And science has, not been able to connect with this. So that's what my research program is moving towards.
But do you feel that the mitochondrial function plays a significant role in this, to answer that question?
I mean, that's the working hypothesis, right? Like every model is wrong in science. You make a model, and then at some point the model is going to be wrong. So far, it's been a very productive hypothesis, right? That the way energy flows through mitochondria relates directly to the human experience. And for example, one hypothesis we tested was that how many positive emotions you have, or positive mood, right? Do you feel inspired? Do you feel loved? Do you feel close to other human beings, trusting, and so on? Or do you feel afraid, betrayed and angry and negative emotions? We ask these experiences, this is, what those people are experiencing. Is this related to the biology of the mitochondria? Could it be that there's an energetic signature, somewhere in the immune cells, in the brain, in other organs of the body? Could it be that this experience of like, wow, life is amazing and I'm full of gratitude and joy and love, could this be an energetic state, right?
Amazing, amazing.
And we have at this point 3 studies that found, supportive evidence for this, and also evidence of a directional relationship. How people feel predicts mitochondrial biology the next day. This is a study we did in 2018 with Alyssa Eppel at UCSF. And then since then, we've done a study in the brain, and we found that the brain mitochondria, after people die, and people donate their brain for science. We looked at the biology of mitochondria in the brain, and then we looked at the human experience of those people before they died, when they were actually able to tell us how they were feeling. And there's a connection. And people who experience life more positively and sense of purpose in life, or who have more connections and they feel social connections, and they feel more happiness, those people have mitochondria in the brain that appear optimized for energy transformation.
That's a revolutionary theory. I mean, like most of the the patients I interact with, and particularly now in this microbiome field where serotonin has become such a popular, and in the amongst the lay public, it's always referred to as the happiness molecule, that your serotonin levels basically determine all these good things that you just mentioned. But
the states, yeah, these experiences.
But I think it's a lot more complex. I mean, it's not one molecule. It's like this idea of that the energy, that this is more to do with the energy than with a single molecule or a single chemical. I mean, not by biological mechanism, but it's also it's just a reflection of how we're moving away from the traditional model in science, the reductionistic model, to the systems biological concept that we see everything is interconnected, and energy is a big part of this, maintaining these interconnections.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, certainly. And specifically regarding serotonin and the molecular and cellular theories of depression and mental illness, that serotonin deficiency was the driver of depression was a hypothesis. It was a good hypothesis decades ago. It was never proven. But there was a lot of money to be made by having this hypothesis be true. And even though it was never proven, it became kind of a staple. And that's what happens sometimes in science. You come up with a hypothesis, and then people become so attached to the hypothesis for whatever reason. I think with our physicalist upbringing, when something has a root cause in something that's physical, molecular, it's appeasing. It makes us feel like the unknown kind of dissipates. And now, even though it's uncomfortable, knowing that there's a physical cause for something is kind of relieves the uncertainty and the unknown. And I think this with the dopamine and the hypothesis for like reward, and then the serotonin hypothesis for depression, those were hypotheses, especially for serotonin. There is no evidence that depression is caused by serotonin deficiency. The drugs act on serotonin. In some people, the drugs have an effect. In many people, they don't. So I think that the hypothesis became a dogma, and now there's such an attachment, culturally, scientifically, financially.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think that's become very counterproductive. And now the message, if you're feeling down and you're feeling, depressed over multiple days and weeks, the message you get from your health care provider is that your brain is broken and it needs a chemical fix, which my my opinion of this is that that's counterproductive. I think the drugs and pharmaceuticals can help in many situations, but this understanding of the root cause, I think, is pulling us away from true, uh, and most effective ways to address problems.
Yeah, I mean, I've run into the same thing in the microbiome field, which initially was dominated by microbiologists who were trained in identifying a pathogen and all the way down to the molecular mechanisms. And there's still quite a few people in the microbiome field now that still have this philosophy. We've got to find this one microbe that's bad, and um, but it's fortunately rapidly being replaced by the systems biological concept that it's really hundreds of millions of billions of microbes and millions of metabolites that all interact and
Yeah.
create. So it sort of brings me to this next topic, which I think is related to the concept of intrinsic health as a foundation for science of health. So you've published a fascinating article. Yeah, I mean, maybe you should explain the basics assumption in this model. I mean, I think this model fits almost like 100% with some holistic theories. It's almost like the scientific underpinning of what people have come up with. But often surprises me how they come up by non-scientific ways with these other things. Yeah, if you could say a few things about this idea of intrinsic health as a
Yes. Yeah, the concept of intrinsic health emerged from the Columbia Science of Health program, SOH. So about 3 years ago, we launched this, and Linda Fried, who is a physician, and she studied frailty, for many years, and she had the sense that we don't have a scientific framework for understanding health, and most of most of biomedical research, most of the NIH, the National Institute of Health, most of the NIH budget is actually funds research on diseases. There's very little of the NIH budget that goes towards understanding the basis of health, or improving health. It's mostly about understanding what goes wrong in diseases, and here again, there's a hypothesis that if you understand the molecular features of disease, you will be able to then go back and prevent that disease, or create a drug that will cure that disease. This was a hypothesis, and I think if you do like a meta-analysis of of biomedicine, I think that hypothesis has not panned out very well. There's been very little successes in understanding the root cause of a disease from studying pathology. Maybe that's a different topic. So with the Science of Health group, we had faculty members from biostatistics, from aging biology, from mitochondrial science. That was my little contribution. Epidemiology, aging, and then we came together weekly initially, and then monthly for about 2-3 years to try to define health. What the hell is health? And we came to the conclusion that other people have come to before. Health is too complex. Like health has too many dimensions, right? And then when it has too many dimensions, that the word health is too loose to actually pin down and quantify, empirically, scientifically. So we had to say there are two components to health. There's a component to health that is intrinsic to the person, right? It's kind of under the skin, and it relates to biology, but it's also influenced by psychology, by social influences, by environmental, right? There's a bidirectional interaction between what happens inside us and outside of us. But intrinsic health is that thing that's inside of us that can be quantified. And then there's realized health, which is you can have, let's say my eyes don't work as well as they should. And, if I don't have my glasses, I can't, see the details of things. And in the distance, I can't see signs. So there's a deficiency in my intrinsic health, right? At the level of my vision. Or you could have, you could lose a leg because of, an accident or something like this. So your intrinsic health might be impaired, but because you have prosthesis, you get glasses, or you get, a prosthesis for your leg, or you get a little scooter if you can't walk properly, right? So there are all sorts of affordances and external things that we have. Then your realized health can be actually quite good. And as we get older, we think intrinsic health goes down. But as you get older, you accumulate resources, you accumulate, social connections, maybe, how the world works. And then your realized health can actually increase over time, even though your intrinsic health goes down. So we had to disentangle those two things, intrinsic health and realized health. So that paper specifically in Science Advances is about what is this intrinsic health and this kind of intrinsic part of what we call health. And what we propose is that intrinsic health is not a thing, like a protein or, mitochondrion or something else. It's a state, very much like a magnetic field. And one property of fields often is that you cannot observe the field directly, right? And to your eyes, to the human senses, fields are invisible, and then they're often ignored until you put something in the field, and then you can measure the strength of a field by the effect the field has on the object, right? So if you want to know, we all live in this gravitational field, and you can't see it, but it's there because if you take an object and you put it in the field and you drop it, then you can measure its acceleration, and then it's 9.8 meters second squared, and then how strong the gravitational field is. So the idea here is that intrinsic health is this property of the organism it's a field-like state, meaning that it might not be directly observable, but you see the traces or you see the effects of the field on biomolecules, on cells, on behaviors, on heart rate variability, on inflammation. So all of those physical, physiological, psychological, behavioral features, we can understand from this perspective as expressions of this field-like state. And then the next question is, where is this field coming from? Is this like there was this is this like the vital force, right? Some like occult, esoteric concept? And the answer is it might relate to that, and it might actually, like you were alluding to, help to explain those esoteric concept. But we think fundamentally the field-like state that is intrinsic health emerges from first principles, the flow of energy through biophysical constraints, through structure, right? Structure of the brain, of the body, of the mitochondria, of the cells, of the gut. This is biophysical structure. When energy flows through structure like this, something happens. The energy gets patterned. And that's then through the patterning of energy flowing through a constraint emerges information, right? And then the energy flowing through is transformed, and then if there is the right infrastructure, which is afforded by biology and genes and the cellular structures we have, then energy is patterned and creates information. And then information is the third component, energy flowing through structure, and then information helps to pattern and direct the energy in proper ways. So then you end up with a system like the human body that fundamentally requires energy flow to stay alive, but it requires intact structure and genes that don't have too many mutations and cells that have intact membranes and so on. But then the energy needs to be organized, and that happens through communication. So that's the third component. And we do this with hormones, with neurotransmitters, with all sorts of things that coordinate and organizes and creates coherence in the body. So in a nutshell, intrinsic health is a field-like state that emerges from the interaction of energy, structure, and communication, and the field affords the properties that we know as resilience, robustness, adaptability, performance, and so on. All of those we think emerge from this field-like state that is intrinsic health.
Wow, this is really it's almost like the string theory of health, I would say. How far do you think the medical field or the scientific field is away from adopting a concept or a theory like this? I mean, this is
Yeah, to adopt a theory like this, the theory needs to be testable, right? So there needs to be part of it that you can actually measure. So the next question that we address in the paper is, how do you measure intrinsic health, right? If this is the basis of your ability to heal and to recover and to be robust and to grow for a child, for example, how the hell do you measure this? So we propose a measurement framework. And just like, you cannot measure gravity directly, you need to put something in the field, drop it, right? So you need to perturb the system in a way or um, uh, to interact with it in some way that reveals its strength or its qualities, its properties. So I think we need, to draw probably from field physics and be inspired by other discipline. I don't think measuring molecules is going to, bring us all the way to understanding intrinsic health. There are other energy-based technologies that are emerging, biophotons. Every living thing, every living cell emits photons. Like I didn't know this until a few years ago. Those are called biophotons, and there's a field of research called UPE, ultra weak photon emission, and and people think this arises, from a quantum process. As you have energy transformed in a living system, there are photons that are emitted spontaneously, and maybe there's information there. And there's a lot of interest for red light therapy and, using light. A lot of people think sunlight has very positive effects on health. I think there's evidence to support this. How does it work? I don't know, but the best theories out there is that light has positive effects on the body. There's some very nice work recently showing red light improves glycemic control and improves glycemic control in diabetics. That might happen through mitochondria. Mitochondria, like the chloroplast in plants, are equipped with molecules, that are heme containing that can absorb light. So it's possible that the light sensor in every one of our cell is actually the mitochondria and some parts, specific parts, proteins of the mitochondrial electron transport chain. So it's possible there's light contributes, right? Light as a quantum generated process that goes beyond or maybe underneath the molecular dimension that biomedicine adopts. It's possible this becomes useful in measuring, quantifying intrinsic health. And what we propose in the paper is kind of a combined approach. Like statistically, if you cannot measure something, you can measure proxies of this. And then you can use statistical methods to say, I can't measure directly what I care about, but I can measure all of these things that I think are related. Now, let's see what's common among all of these measures and try to estimate intrinsic health. So that's what we propose. And I think in 5 years, I really hope there are energy-based methods for health monitoring and maybe intervening instead of intervening molecularly, pharmacologically by inhibiting a receptor or stimulating some process. We might have ways, energy-based ways through electromagnetic fields or through light or through bioelectricity to actually stimulate the healing process and not be just bound to inhibit or hyperactivate some biological systems.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I would say, it will probably take science a longer time than the lay public because, I mean, like many of these concepts are growing rapidly in popularity. I see this all the time. I mean, even amongst medical students, and so this, I mean, so before the brainwashing of medical school kicks in, obviously a lot of young people have these kind of ideas.
Yep. I think if I can say something about this, I think um, many people that are smart and interested and they want to be empowered, they want to take their health into their own hands. And people have intuitions about what works for them and what's true. And either because of their own lived experience, they know something to be true. And then if you know something to be true and something that works for you, and then you go see your doctor and you say, well, I do this and it helps me. And your doctor says, there's no science, this is not true. Like, this doesn't work. Then either you start to mistrust yourself, right? And you say, oh, like I must be a bad person, or I'm gullible, or whatever, self-depreciation we're very good at doing. Or you start to mistrust your physician and, the whole medical establishment. There are tens of millions of people in America and around the world. I think in America, maybe that's a little more acute. Tens of millions of people who have started to mistrust the medical establishment, and who have started to feel like scientists are just, doing their thing, and they're spending a lot of money doing like fancy science that will get published in fancy journals that they don't even have access to. So I think there's a bond of trust and confidence. I think we as scientists haven't done a really good job at making sure that the science we do has the potential to touch human lives, and taking scientific approaches that respect, individuality. All of our science is average based. Nobody is the average, right? But all the trials and everything, for something to become evidence-based, it needs to move the average, in the appropriate direction. Nobody is the average. And in every trial, the clinical trials that end up granting approval by FDA for some therapy, the approval is not granted based on individual data, it's granted on average data. But in every trial, if you peel off the surface layer, you find that some people responded amazingly, right? These are the people who should be receiving this treatment or this intervention. Some other people were injured, right? And we have no way now. There's the scientific framework, the biomedical framework, doesn't have a way to take that into account. So we end up, having blanket statements that this drug works for this treatment, or this intervention, is efficacious, and it is for some people, it is not for other people. And we have a hard time with a rigid materialistic framework making sense of this and capturing individuality. So I think that erodes trust, and this needs to change.
Yeah, and I think we as scientists have a big responsibility, because I think what we're seeing now happening, this has a political dimension as well. Questioning of science and NIH funding. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going on as a side effect of this frustration of patients with, spending billions of dollars for biomedical research, but not really, I mean, people survive. They're not getting healthier. I mean, people survive longer. So we're really good in keeping people alive, but not really in finding.
And charging them for it. Yeah. Yes, I agree. I mean, your podcast, I think, is an example of a very useful, valuable kind of connection. Talking about real things that matters for people, and helping scientists think about what matters for people, and helping educate the public about key concepts that they can use and use in their health. So we need to do more of this. I salute you for this.
Thanks very much. A side question, maybe not that important for our audience, but for us scientists. So with your unconventional views and focus on health rather than disease, so we talked about the NIH funding primarily disease-related research. Have you been able to maintain your federal funding on this really innovative concepts?
Yes, we've been very lucky to have generous NIH funding, and more recently non-NIH funding to push the envelope a little further than what NIH reviewers, which are other scientists, kind of that like many of us that are stuck in the paradigm. So we've been able to maintain funding, and the approach has been to tackle problems that we all agree are important, like inflammation. And then to bring in a new idea, like mitochondria could be the basis of inflammation, right? Because they produce those signals. The mitochondria used to be bacteria, and maybe psychological stress causes inflammation, which we know happens. We've known for 20 years. How does that happen? So one of our NIH grant, tested the hypothesis that stress affects the mitochondria, and mitochondria are the signals for inflammation. So we've been able to attract funding to address those really important questions that the scientific community at large agrees are important, and we bring in a new, energetic perspective to the problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, this topic of so I think you also co-author, the author of a paper on allostatic load and overload and the role of the mitochondria in the negative health effects. As you said, we've known this for a long time. So we have this very effective life-saving acute stress responses, but if it's stimulated, overstimulated, or stimulated too, becomes maladaptive. So you think that that the mitochondria do play a role somewhere in this chain between the psychological or physical stress and the inflammations?
Yes. So the stress inflammation cascade, or more broadly, the stress disease cascade, or the stress aging cascade, right? A lot of things happen in the middle. Our working hypothesis is really this cascade is a stress energy disease cascade, right? Or stress energy aging cascade. And so we've tested that model and the hypothesis that emerged from it in a few different ways. And so far, I think there's a lot of evidence supporting this. The reason stress is bad for health is because it costs energy. And then that ends up stealing energy away from the processes that normally keep us healthy and young. So stress probably, the organism, that's a longer discussion, but we have a fixed energy budget. And stress basically now takes a big chunk of your energy budget just to prepare in case something dangerous happens. But that energy needs to come from somewhere. There's not unbounded energy. If you want more energy, you cannot just eat more. And now you can afford to not sleep, and if you eat more, you actually end up, damaging the system and, being less energetic. So the stress, we think, happens and predisposes to disease because it steals energy.
So that's a really interesting concept. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I have to say, whatever I think for a lot of your colleagues, probably some of these things are not necessarily something that they would agree with. But I have to say, for me, it makes a lot of sense. And I love this connecting to both to healing traditions, but also to the cutting edge science. I mean, that connection, I think, is really fascinating.
I think that's where the future is. Yeah. So I'm happy this resonates with you, and I hope it resonates with your audience. There's so much more work to be done, and so much more to discover.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. It was really a pleasure talking to you this morning. I hope we'll have another opportunity in the future to touch base and exchange our views on things. And when do you think your book will be coming out?
It's going to come out probably February 2027.
Okay.
So in about a year and a half.
Sounds good. Good luck with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Good talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.